Hello, and thank you very much for watching this webinar about GlobalGAP certification in the time of coronavirus and COVID-19. My name is Robin Rose. I'm the Key Account Manager for GlobalGAP North America. This webinar is intended for producers, packers, buyers, and consultants seeking to understand the impact of this pandemic on GlobalGAP certification options and procedures. I'm recording this on May 27th of 2020, and all information presented in this webinar is accurate and current as of this date. In this presentation, I will quickly review the relationship between GlobalGAP and GFSI and why it matters to some. Then we're going to dive into coronavirus updates and look at the certification options available during this time of global emergency. I will review extension procedures and the new GlobalGAP Remote audit option. We're going to look at the food safety impacts of the coronavirus, and I will present some best practices for producers in managing related risks. Finally, I'm going to leave you with links to reliable authorities for up-to-date information. So GlobalGAP is a global organization headquartered in Cologne, Germany. We have representatives all over the world working to serve the needs of local agricultural and retail markets. GlobalGAP was founded in 1997 to harmonize standards for product safety, environmental sustainability, and the health, safety, and welfare of workers and animals. This harmonization allows producers to avoid having multiple audits for different buyers. GlobalGAP is an independent certification system for good agricultural practices and includes production practice standards and a set of rules for audits and certification programs. The Global Food Safety Initiative, or GFSI, is part of the Consumer Goods Forum and recognizes food safety certification programs that meet GFSI benchmarking requirements. Some retailers and buyers value GFSI recognized certification, requiring or preferring suppliers that have GFSI benchmark certificates. To facilitate growers and shippers being able to meet the needs of their buyers, GlobalGAP has invested significant time and effort into earning and maintaining GFSI recognition for some selected standards for the last 12 years. So what is GlobalGAP doing in response to this unique situation we are in today as a result of the novel coronavirus? We've always been part of the global solution for producers, packers, shippers, and buyers to determine best practices for food safety and to protect human health. Now is no different. We're working hard every day from our own homes instead of at the office to facilitate the flow of credible information and safe food. Since the outbreak began, we have been in constant discussion with stakeholders, health and disease experts, and the agricultural community to get the latest accurate scientific information in order to communicate regulatory requirements and industry best practices to producers and certification bodies. You can use the link here to the coronavirus page on our website to see online resources we've compiled and the latest news and updates. We're also active participants in several industry trade groups to obtain and share the latest information from the field to the industry and back. For example, in my home market of the United States, we're engaging with United Fresh and the Produce Marketing Association. We've also been very vocal to GFSI about the needs of producers, buyers, and certification bodies, and have been standing up for making appropriate exceptions, extensions, and adjustments to certification requirements to allow the continuing flow of trade while ensuring the integrity of the certification system. We've built lasting relationships across the globe with buying organizations to ensure that food safety is still of the utmost importance during this time, just with allowing more flexibility in how we accomplish this. On our website, we're publishing GAP Talks, which are one-on-one podcast-style interviews with experts, including retailers. We've also just published some really great GAP in Action posters, which are available in English and Spanish, and that use images to show best practices for avoiding COVID-19 spread at the farm, and which you can use to hang around the workplace. I've used some of the images from these posters on the later slides of this presentation. Finally, we're rapidly implementing new audit and inspection options, which I'm going to discuss in this presentation to help the industry move forward during these challenging and unprecedented times. So the first option available to provide immediate audit relief to producers and certification bodies in areas with travel restrictions or health concerns is to allow extensions of certificates, corrective action periods, and audits. These extensions have been reviewed and found acceptable by GFSI, and any certificates using one of the extensions below will still be considered GFSI benchmarked. For an existing certificate that's set to expire before an on-site audit can be safely conducted, GlobalGAP can offer a 6-month extension of that certificate. The extensions are not automatic. Certified producers must request them from their certification body. Once that request has been made, the certification body will conduct a risk assessment to determine if the extension is necessary. So say, for example, if an auditor needs to travel to a particular region that requires a 14-day quarantine, then of course an on-site audit is not possible and the extension would be granted. So extensions are for the 2019 to 2020 audit cycle and will require the producer to be audited during the 2020 to 2021 audit cycle. The extension does not replace the need for an audit, resulting in a new certificate next year. It simply provides more time to wait out the virus cycle while limiting travel and potential exposure for all involved. Another emergency extension allows for certified producers to request an additional 28 days to respond to corrective actions, pending justifiable circumstances, for both initial and recertification inspections. Examples of justifiable reasons include a sick food safety manager, quarantine, auditors needing to cross borders, and more. Importantly, we're also allowing more flexibility of timing for off-site and on-site inspections to occur. Previously, there was a 4-week maximum between the off-site desk review and the on-site verification part of the audit. The ability to divide up the audit into 2 halves with the off-site and on-site modules occurring separately has been really successful even before the pandemic. We hope certification bodies and producers will continue to use this format even more now, as it provides flexibility to move through the documents at the pace the auditor wants to, in the safety of their own home. It does require careful planning and execution of document sharing and careful planning of when to execute the on-site verification of the inspection. These emergency extensions are temporary procedures, and we've been working on a more global and semi-permanent solution. So that bigger solution is called GlobalGAP Remote, our new certification option. Now, discussions about the opportunity for remote audits have been going on for years, but this pandemic has really brought the issue to the forefront. In today's modern era of technology and communications, we just can't put human health and safety at risk if other options exist. Right now, in many regions, inspectors and auditors cannot access production sites due to travel restrictions imposed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Because of this, GFSI has allowed that annual inspections, audits, and assessments can be postponed by up to 6 months, as I just discussed. So as a result of that, demands for audits are expected to increase in the second half of 2020 to the extent that there's likely going to be a shortage of available inspectors and auditors. In addition, there hasn't been a solution for certificates where the 6-month extension has already expired. So therefore, we're going to introduce GlobalGAP Remote as a response to this COVID-19 crisis, and it uses the established GlobalGAP system. It builds on the current rules for the standards and add-ons by providing guidelines on conducting remote audits. We published the first draft of the remote audit guidelines at the end of April. We had an expedited consultation period for stakeholder feedback that closed on May 5th. 46 organizations or individuals from more than 20 countries offered their input during the development period. We made changes and revisions based on the feedback received. We published our initial final version in English on May 15th. German, Italian, and Spanish translations will be available soon. While we've done our best in this short time to respond to all feedback and cover all contingencies, GlobalGAP Remote will nevertheless be a work in progress. Changes and updates may be made as we receive further feedback from the results of remote inspections, audits, and assessments. So what is it? GlobalGAP Remote is a set of rules around how certification bodies can use technology to conduct audits virtually when there are travel restrictions or health risks present that preclude on-site visits, and how to use the current control points and compliance criteria in our standards for the virtual audits. GlobalGAP Remote is to be implemented for all control points in the same way as an on-site audit, and it will be an option during this pandemic and until further notice. GlobalGAP Remote allows for initial certification, recertification, certificate scope extension, transfer, and more based on fully remote inspections. This remote option is available only where travel restrictions affecting the ability to conduct the audit exist. GlobalGAP Remote can be used for all GlobalGAP standards and add-ons per the approval of the add-on owner. It covers local GAP and primary farm assurance for each scope and subscope. So as I mentioned, GFSI is not allowing certification based on fully remote audits at this time. Therefore, certificates issued via remote audits, while accredited, will not be GFSI benchmarked. If GFSI benchmark certificates are essential to a buyer, even during this extraordinary time of global pandemic, GlobalGAP Remote will not be an option. The certificates issued as a result of a fully remote audit will have the word remote featured on the certificate to allow for differentiation in the market. And in the coming weeks, we plan to publish a guide for users of the GlobalGAP system on how to identify the certificates based on this GlobalGAP Remote interim certification procedure. So the emergency extension options I discussed first are not relevant for producers seeking certification for the first time. However, even in these times of extraordinary global pandemic, the needs of the market for the flow of trade doesn't stop. Buyers continue to need assurance about new suppliers, and producers continue to need to be certified to sell their products. So in order to allow new producers to get certified, we're including new certifications in our GlobalGAP Remote audit program. Producers who seek certification for the first time can receive a remote certificate from a certification body based on a fully remote audit. However, that certificate will not be considered accredited until the first on-site follow-up audit has been successfully completed, which must be within 6 weeks after travel restrictions are lifted. We don't anticipate that this should cause any issues, but producers seeking remote audits for new certificates should be sure to discuss with their buyers to make sure this is acceptable. So to summarize, GlobalGAP is offering solutions for everyone at every step of the process to facilitate the flow of trade while ensuring food safety and the protection of human health. All of these options are backed by GlobalGAP's top-notch verification system and integrity programs. To accommodate the needs in the market, we're offering solutions that are both GFSI and not GFSI approved to ensure everyone's health is protected with minimal disruption of certification. The extension procedures for certificates, corrective action periods, and audit timelines are GFSI approved, and all GFSI recognized GlobalGAP standards under that umbrella qualify, such as IFA Fruit and Vegetables version 5.3 GFS, aquaculture, and HPSS. For those producers that would like to continue certification using the remote option, we're making that available with the understanding that it is not GFSI recognized, but is accredited for existing certificates. For the remote option, that would mean producers opt for IFA version 5.2 rather than IFA version 5.3 GFS. Further, we want to ensure that first-time producers have the option to become certified in order to participate in supply chain assurance. However, a fully remote initial certification is not recognized by GFSI, nor will this be an accredited option. Producers seeking certification for the first time that need GFSI recognition are better served by taking advantage of the emergency extension of the audit timelines for the offsite and onsite modules. I would like to really emphasize that all three options are subject to the GlobalGAP Certification Integrity Program, known as CIPRO. So there's no lapse in credibility for any GlobalGAP certificate at any time. We know there is a global need for remote audit capabilities and food safety assurance. In the age of technological advances, surely we can have a solution that provides food safety assurance in a credible manner. So now that we've covered how certification and audits are affected by the pandemic, let's look more directly at how the virus is impacting producers. In all this darkness, there is a bright spot in the fact that there is no evidence that the novel coronavirus is a foodborne illness. Government officials and global health organizations have been quoted indicating that food is not a likely source of contamination risk. The United States Food and Drug Administration said, quote, "Currently there is no evidence of food or food packaging being associated with the transmission of COVID-19. Accordingly, other government organizations have said very similar things. And this is because coronaviruses cannot multiply in food or food packaging. They need a host, whether animal or human, in order for growth to happen. So the bad news is that coronavirus spread most commonly by people to people or animal to people via droplets spread by a sneeze or cough. And if those droplets contact mucous membranes of the mouth, nose, or eyes of another person, either directly or indirectly, such as by touching a contaminated surface, it can lead to infection. So now, more than ever, we're looking to our farmers and the supply chain to keep us healthy and fed, and why it's critical for all operations to take mitigation measures to protect their workforce. This is why we're addressing coronavirus from a worker health and safety perspective, looking primarily at keeping employees safe and operations running. So the good news is that farms that have been certified to GlobalGAP IFA have already been practicing many of the basic hygiene guidelines that are recommended by health authorities, simply by following their own food safety procedures. We think that food safety operations with an existing food safety culture, who are in the unique position of being cleanliness and sanitation driven, can and already do stand up to the challenge of COVID-19. Many GlobalGAP control points already cover hygiene requirements, and the best practice recommendations that are given in this webinar may vary from country to country to region-specific requirements, and every operation or producer's risk assessments will be different. But risk assessments should be updated to include COVID-19 specific mitigation practices. In future audits, the auditors will check if the effects of the pandemic were included in the risk assessments and the necessary measures were taken regarding health and safety, and the necessary training to explain and reinforce the measures taken, such as hand washing and good general hygiene and sanitation, and whether the accident and emergency procedures were updated. Auditors will also check the subcontractor and visitor policies. However, please note that we are not adding requirements to the audit. We're building on the work already achieved for an added layer of protection so that we all do our part in not spreading the virus. The best tool is reinforcement of existing hygiene requirements at production locations and showing workers that they are cared for by providing resources and communicating how the virus spreads and mitigation procedures to slow it down. Let's look specifically at the GlobalGAP IFA compliance criteria in the All Farm Modules 3 and 4 and the best practice recommendations for hygiene and worker health and safety. Producers should be prepared for how to run the operation when significant parts of the workforce are ill, or if the operation needs to run on minimal staff. The emergency procedures should identify responses to a temporary, short, or long-term close down of the operation. What is the communication plan to all workers and other relevant parties? These should be clear and succinct. In situations like this, it's always better to think of these scenarios ahead of time and be prepared, rather than live through them and be underprepared. It's similar to building recall procedures that stand up to the test and support producers through the worst of times. We currently have GlobalGAP certified producers reporting dealing with ill staff, farmers themselves that are sick and in quarantine, ill food safety personnel, and outbreaks in worker housing. So there's a possibility of all of these situations, and it's important to have contingency plans. Producers should review their risk assessments and consider whether the operation's normal activities allow for social distancing of at least 6 feet or 2 meters at all times. And if not, how to limit the periods when this is not possible. For example, during busy harvest and packing seasons, perhaps it's not practical to maintain social distance. So what else can be done to protect workers? Providing protective face coverings or masks to employees is one option. Some facilities are using plastic shields in between line workers to separate them from each other. This obviously may or may not work in all environments. Another method is staggering line positions or harvest locations. Some operations are staggering work shifts, including break times, to control the flow of people in the field and the facilities. Look at the break areas and whether they allow for social distancing. Adding table capacity or staggering break times can help ensure that workers feel and stay safe. How workers enter and leave the sites are important too. Is there a congregation area? Do they carpool when they're driving to work with people from different families? Each of these are areas of risk that should be considered, and the options and limitations are different in each location and for each company. It is essential that workers have access to sanitary hand washing facilities. This is already a requirement in the GlobalGAP standards, but it's a practice that deserves additional emphasis at this time. Everyone must practice 20-second hand washing with soap and water. This is really the best way to avoid spreading the virus. Workers should be instructed not to touch their faces and to wash their hands anytime they do touch their face to protect themselves and others. Keeping sick workers home is absolutely critical. Keeping ill individuals away from produce has always been included in the GlobalGAP standards, but now is the time to go a step further to protect other workers in the facility. Since it can take for up to 2 weeks for a sick person to develop symptoms, it's very challenging to know if workers are sick. Our recommendation is to look to your local health department and worker safety legislation to know what kind of non-invasive options are available to protect the workforce. For example, operations may check employee temperature or ask each worker a series of questions about their health and potential exposure before starting to work as people enter the sites. Visitors, if they must be present, including auditors, must also strictly follow instructions on social distancing and hygiene. Visitor policies could include requiring a health questionnaire, such as the same given to employees, for example, riding in separate vehicles, refraining from shaking hands or touching objects. However, many operations and farms are adopting a no visitor policy at this time, and we do support that decision. Other considerations may not be directly included in the GlobalGAP control points, but directly contribute to reducing the spread of the virus. These include additional cleaning and sanitation of employee congregation areas, such as break rooms, for example, from once a day to twice a day, or at the frequency that makes sense for the amount of use. Increasing sanitation, or at least increasing surveillance of high-touch surfaces or stations with operational rotation makes extra sense right now. For example, tools, bins, tabletops, clipboards, electronics, keyboards, hard hats, microwaves, knobs, and other high-touch areas would benefit from having sanitation between users and/or the training of workers using those areas. Best cleaning practices for preventing coronavirus transmission includes using soap, bleach, or isopropyl alcohol solutions with at least 70% alcohol that are undiluted. Another option is hydrogen peroxide 3% used as is or diluted to 0.5% and left on the surface for 1 minute prior to wiping. Discussing the steps taken to minimize risk and providing training to all employees is essential. Communication plays a huge role in preventing transmission. Overall, employees must believe that the employer cares for them and that the actions I have discussed are part of taking steps to minimizing exposure risk to employees. If there are any doubts about what is required or allowed, please contact local or regional public health departments. So frequently asked questions, or FAQs, regarding these topics I've just discussed are available online. It's important for you to be able to access the information. So slides for this presentation included on our website have all of the relevant links. At any time, if in doubt, the recommendations are best straight from the source, such as the World Health Organization or the FAO website, or any of the other references on this page. And again, our updates are all available under the coronavirus section of our website. You can send specific requests or questions to GlobalGAP at standard_support@globalgap.org or customer_support@globalgap.org. In order to stay up to date with the most current information on GlobalGAP certification, please sign up for the GlobalGAP newsletter. We don't have much opportunity to communicate directly with producers and buyers and other folks impacted by these kind of topics, and this newsletter is the mechanism by which we will fill you in. Information is also available on our website, and we make all of our standards, our documents, our checklists, etc., available and free to anyone. It's our goal to be as transparent and inclusive as possible. We're active on all the social media channels, especially on LinkedIn, if you wish to follow us there. With that, I will thank you for your time. Please feel free to reach out with any questions, comments, or concerns via your regional representative. I wish you all the best and that you stay healthy and well in the coming months. Thank you.